hope lives always. But sometimes it takes a little something extra. Maybe somebody, maybe something else, for us to be able to notice it. Jesus turns to his disciples when they are particularly worried and says this to them. This is in Luke chapter 12. He said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do a small thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you eat and what you are to drink. Do not keep worrying, for it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and all these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." This is the word of God. Jesus, when talking to his friends at their height of worry, points to the lilies, points to the flowers, points to the ravens and the grass. It says, look at this. If God cares for this, how much more does God care for you? He wants them to notice the hope growing literally all around them. And it reminds me of a man that I met, a very eccentric artist that I met when I was taking a sculpture class at Wake Forest University. This is a class on molding and casting. It's a kind of art where you make a mold of something and you cast it with a material. It's a way to make sculptures in a different way. Well, this man, he didn't really consider himself an artist, but he was a nature lover. And as a lover of nature, he felt like other people did not notice the beauty that he saw when he walked outside. That they walked past the trees that he thought were so amazing, and they didn't notice the trees. They didn't notice the lilies of the field. They didn't notice the grass clothed in its splendor. And so he decided to do something about it. And so what he did was he made a mold of his head, of his bald head. And he cast in that mold concrete. And he did this over 100 times, making these heavy molds of his head, these castings of his head. And what he would do was he'd set them next to trees that he thought were pretty, set them next to flowers that he hoped that people would notice. And he did this all over the city in which he lived. He told us that he knew the location of every single one of these casts of his head. And he said sometimes they disappear, sometimes they got moved, but only he knew where all of them were. And I was constantly looking for these things. But what he wanted to do was the same thing Jesus wanted to do for his disciples here. He wanted people to look at the natural world and recognize the hope inside of it, recognize the beauty in it, and to see their own perspective, their own inclusion into that beauty. May we be able to notice the trees without having to look at a crazy man's concrete head to do so. May we be able to notice the birds and the lilies and recognize that if God so cares for those things, that God cares for us as well. That in those things lies hope. and hope lives always.